He's Nottingham through and through. He's a modern day Robin Hood. He fights for the people.
England belongs to me. A nation's pride, the dirty water of the rivers. No one can take away her memory. Whoa, England belongs to me.
My name's Dan Hardy. I've been a martial artist since I was 6, and that became a profession in 2004. And then in 2008, I signed with the UFC.
Dan Hardy was part of a new generation pioneering the sport in the UK through being signed up by the UFC. That whole generation that's included Michael Bisping and later Ross Pearson and guys like that. Very important for the first real foundations as well of those guys being covered in the media here. Because of course, very quickly in his UFC career, he had this stellar rise towards the UFC welterweight title. But when you think of Dan characteristically, it's that great left hook, tenacity on the feet, striking prowess, come forward fighter who claps his gloves together and goes to work.
I was just a kid doing martial arts to start with. I started when I was 6, and I was really into Ninja Turtles. That's what got me started. And with me being at school and being kind of active and aggressive and full of energy, and I was, kicking kids at school. And my parents took me to a Taekwondo class, and that's really where it started. I didn't fall in love with it immediately. It was very difficult because it wasn't something I found easy. I wasn't particularly flexible, and Taekwondo revolves a lot around high kicking. But it kind of introduced me to martial arts, and then from that I had a great instructor, and he passed on loads of videos, Van Damme movies and loads of Bruce Lee books, and it just kind of introduced me to the world of martial arts and made me realise how big it was, to be honest. And yeah, I got carried away with it. My drive for martial arts was always to try and, find my comfort zone and find my way out of it. And that was the same for any kind of competition that I did. So as soon as I realised I couldn't grapple, I started entering grappling tournaments because I wanted to feel that discomfort. It would cause me to evolve. I'd just go anywhere in the country to find whatever kind of fight I could find. So it'd be, a jiu-jitsu tournament one on Saturday, and then on the Sunday I'd have a Taekwondo tournament. And it was just kind of travelling around and getting a fight wherever I could find one. But then as soon as I saw the UFC, that became my focus, and I started to tailor my training towards that, even though I was still competing in Thai boxing. It kind of took over, and because mixed martial arts was taking off in this country and we started to have smaller shows coming up, I had my first fight in Extreme Brawl, and then we had Cage Warriors and all these other shows. It gave me an opportunity to kind of get in there and try it out, and it took me a few years. If I'd have started the UFC as soon as I wanted to, I wouldn't have lasted very long at all. And I needed those preliminary years of getting beaten up in the smaller shows to really understand what it was going to take to be in the UFC. As soon as I decided that this is what I wanted to pursue, I wanted to be a part of this sport and compete at the best level that I could, I needed to be in amongst guys that were already doing it. And unfortunately at the time in the UK, there weren't enough guys around for me to really be in amongst them and get beaten up on a regular basis. I had great training partners, but we all helped each other raise our own levels, whereas I needed to really be at the deep end. And so for me, American Top Team was a good starting point, then Team Quest after that, and then finally Legends in California. And just moving around, and living off a credit card and eating peanut butter sandwiches all day. For me, that was a part of the experience. That was a part of the sacrifice. My treat during the week was a tin of tuna, which sounds funny right now because, obviously things have changed a lot, but I earned it back then. When I stepped into the Octagon and when I was faced in front of my opponent, I knew that I'd sacrificed and given so much more than him, and that was where my confidence came from.
To be an individual served him well when he came into MMA and had to press out into new frontiers as a pioneer and work out what was going on in the sport when he went over to America on his own.
And I was just another kid in the gym. I was a nobody, so I was used as a sparring partner and as a punch bag. And American Top Team threw me in against the Dogs on the first day, and that was a rough day. I got some big shots on that day, but it was all part of it. It was all part of the experience. I was competing in a tournament in Japan, and the rumor of the tournament was it was an 8-man tournament, and the winner would get a UFC contract. So I won the first 2 fights against the odds, and in the final fight, I got disqualified at the beginning of the second round for an accidental kick to the groin. And as they carried him out on a stretcher, they hung the belt over his shoulder, and he won the tournament. So he got his UFC contract, and I was like in Japan on my own, like with all that fight energy still in me because I didn't get any kind of closure. Called my manager up straight away and I said, okay, I need a fight next week. So I had a couple more fights and I beat a couple of guys that were worth beating and got the offer to come through, but I already had another fight scheduled for the week after for another show. And that was another situation where the UFC said, well, if you fight and you lose, the contract's gone. And that was the most stressful fight of my career by far. So when I did finally get that contract and finally get it signed, even well, the first few fights in the UFC, I had no nerves because I'd kind of achieved what I set out to achieve. My goal was never really the UFC belt. I wanted to get to the UFC. That was the first goal I'd set, and I did it. And it took me a couple of fights to realize that I had to reassess my goals and set some new ones, and then, you know, obviously, let's aim for the title now because we're already here. But those first 2 fights in the UFC were the most relaxed I've ever been.
Well, he's the outlaw, so the bandana makes sense.
The first guy was Akihiro Gono. He was, I think he'd had 40 or 50 fights.
Akihiro Gono!
He was a very, very wily, very elusive counter fighter from Japan.
The Brit Dan Hardy. Not only does he want to debut victoriously, but he wants to make a name for himself.
And that was just a really frustrating fight. I had to chase him all over for 15 minutes.
Gono, very crafty, immediately slides out of the way.
Yeah, he's gone.
Gono, good right hand by Gono. Good counters by Hardy.
But I do remember that Dan stood out as someone who had something about him. It was like the arrival of a new British star.
Dan, the Outlaw Hardy!
And all the outlaws in attendance love it.
And then the second one was Roy Markham, who had just come off a huge knockout, head kick knockout. It was just brutal. A lot of people didn't expect me to win.
Markham trying to push forward. Good left hook, he is hits him! It's a wow! Wow! Dan Hardy explodes on Rory Markham! Dan Hardy! Man! That was picture perfect!
Sometimes you find the guys that they sign with the UFC and then they get a couple of comfortable fights to kind of break them in against other guys that are just starting out. Not me, I got veterans and stood straight away.
Against Marcus Davis, he had again a toe-to-toe battle against a very angry Marcus Davis. But Hardy didn't take any notice of that, stayed professional and was brilliant in that fight because Marcus Davis was a real wily and very powerful veteran, and Hardy really took him to school in that fight. I thought it was a great performance.
Oh, Davis is down! Hardy looking to finish. He caught him with a big knee. He's bloodied up too.
He's bloodied up.
That might have been that elbow that just landed, Joe.
And then, of course, he came to Manchester. Mike Swick was really in contention for the title at the time.
Swick and Hardy for a shot at that man. Oh, Swick got him again. He's hurt. He's hurt. Hardy caught Mike Swick, and Hardy's got a smile on his face.
Swick misjudged Dan Hardy's abilities and timing, and Dan Hardy knocked him from pillar to post across the ring.
That was a tremendous performance by Dan Hardy.
And that, of course, earned him the title shot with George St. Pierre. Right place, right time, right man, and here was Dan Hardy's opportunity.
I'm excited, people. I hope you are too.
We look forward to seeing you two in action. George St. Pierre, ladies and gentlemen, and Dan the Outlaw Hardy. That's a hell of a matchup.
George St. Pierre had beaten all the other contenders and there was not really anybody else around, and I had a 3-fight win streak and then just beat Mike Swick to make it my 4th. The fan support I got for that fight was amazing, and especially because I was the underdog. Most people said, oh, he's going to get submitted in the first round and there's no question. The Brits have just an undying support for anybody, regardless of the odds they're up against. And I just love that so much, you know, because I was really up against it. That walk from behind the curtain to the octagon, it's like walking through water. Because everything's slowed down, everything's hypersensitive. You can hear different voices in the crowd, you pick out a lot of faces that you recognize. Taking that moment to gather myself and realize where I'm at and what's at stake, and that this is the moment to step up. Switch to reptile mode then, and it changes everything. You know, you're in fight mode, and you're in a completely different space. It was nice to be the first Brit to get a title shot. I mean, obviously that was an honor.
Dan Hardy went into the fight with George St. Pierre knowing that he needed to land his dangerous hooks and throw his knees and catch George St. Pierre and knock him off balance and knock the sense out of him and take the fight from him in the way that perhaps Matt Serra had done years before.
I never really put him on a pedestal, to be honest. I always saw everybody in my division as my equals. It was just kind of a mentality that I had to adopt because I didn't want to step in there and be like, oh, he's the champion. I always had that respect, but never an opinion that he was any better than me. Getting the opportunity to fight him was great, and obviously I went in there with the full intention of winning, knowing I was up against the odds and that my chances were slim.
Looking to land that left hook. Let's see. There's the takedown. What it takes for the takedown and takedown from St. Pierre.
He was a better athlete for a start, better wrestler.
George got a hold of him again, and right down.
I wasn't comfortable enough on my feet to really engage, really do anything, because I was so preoccupied with the takedown. And then when we were on the floor, a lot of the time it was just a battle to try and either get back to my feet or stay safe.
Looking to get that arm. 20 seconds left in the round. He's got it. 20 seconds, looking for the arm bar.
If there was something I want to know about, learn about, I want to go directly to the source of it and understand it at its origins. The Shaolin monks I always admired because they started at such a young age, 4, 5, 6 years old, and they trained all day, every day, and their whole life was dedicated to martial arts. I did some research and I found a place in China that I could go and train, a castle on a hill in the middle of nowhere, and 12 hours a day training and getting hit with sticks and yelled at. We were joking and laughing, and one of the monks came over and he yelled at us. The punishment stance was called mabu. It's horse stance. So it's basically like a seated squat position. And then we had to have hands in prayer position. But what they would do is they would put a bow staff, so a long 6-foot staff. They'd put one across our waist so we couldn't stand up at all, or it would roll off. And then one across the crease of our elbows, so obviously we had to keep our hands up as well. I was just waiting for my legs to collapse. I was waiting for them to give out, and they never gave out. My body was telling me that it was done, but I overrode it with my mind, and my body listened. And from that point, I've used it all the way through my martial arts career, all the way through my UFC career, because if somebody tells me that I can't do something, I'm going to do it, and if it's my own body telling me I can't do it, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to make it do it.
Can he finish? Hardy trying to hold on. He turns over. Nicely done, Dan Hardy. Wow!
My only goal when I was going in there was just to give it everything I got. I could have fought with one arm, so my concern wasn't losing one of them.
He's got to wrap it up. It's behind his back. He stopped.
Looking for the finish here.
Very
trying to submit Dan Hardy. Can he do it?
Oh, it's bad. Dan's got a tap. He's got a tap.
But what Dan Hardy did show in that fight was the heart of a champion, the desire of a champion. He was celebrated as having gone 25 minutes with George St. Pierre without really sustaining too much damage.
Hardy almost had his arm ripped off a couple times, but not a ton of damage, as you said, but still never in position to win this fight.
But the way that fight turned out was the best way it could have done on the night. If I'd have knocked him out, people would have said it was a lucky punch. And if it had beaten me a lot quicker than the 25 minutes, then I would have been disregarded as someone that should have never got a title shot anyway.
George in disbelief right now that Hardy didn't tap.
You were never thinking about tapping from that?
I don't know the meaning of tap.
And I did better than a lot of people thought I was going to. And I got a lot from that. I really got a lot of confidence from that. But then again, if I'd beat him on that first night, I would have lost in a rematch, I'm sure, anyway. So I would have needed this headspace that where I'm at now in order to approach that fight with the potential of winning it, I think.
He goes 5 rounds with George St. Pierre, but then came up against Carlos Condit.
Dan Hardy loves the matchup tonight against Condit. The way they fight, they are truly mirror images of each other. Yes. I like how... Whoa! Absolutely right! He's out! And it is all over! Carlos Condit!
Tell us what you think went wrong here tonight.
I got punched in the face. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Next time.
Then Dan Hardy fought a giant Rumble Johnson at welterweight and was caught and hurt in that fight.
I get mine.
Hardy. And he's taken down. Nice takedown by Johnson. Finishes with ground and pound.
Rumble Johnson.
The Dan Hardy that fought Chris Lytle for me, perhaps there was something playing in his mind that it was the 4th loss in a row. Perhaps it was because it was Chris Lytle's final fight after a long and decorated career. That was the one fight where I was concerned for him.
Oh, nice right hand. Hook is there all day long. The body. Got to be careful of the neck.
Lytle's got a guillotine. He's got it. He's
Trying to
mounted
choke him out.
Hardy's in deep
Trying
trouble.
to finish this fight.
He's tapping. That's
It is all over. Chris Lytle has won his final UFC fight.
But because of his brand, because of the way he delivers, because he's so popular, because he never says no to any opponent, even though we may have been perceiving it as the end of Dan Hardy's career and that they could be cutting him from the roster, I don't think the UFC had even considered cutting him.
Britain's Dan Hardy.
He has basically taken the last year off to train in the areas in which he believed he was deficient. That means his grappling, his wrestling, and his overall ground game.
And this is a new chapter in the life of the MMA career of Dan the Outlaw Hardy.
The victory for Dan Hardy over Dwayne Ludwig was crucial on 2 fronts. It was his first win for 30 months, but secondarily, he won by knockout, not just knockout of the night.
Dan Hardy has a very good lead left hook.
Oh, there it is! Just like that! Trying to finish it! It is all over! Dan Hardy wins tonight!
That's that vicious left hook that we saw against Rory Marco.
And it signaled that Dan Hardy was back. In the lead up to that fight in Nottingham against Amir Sadolla, it was about Dan almost hypnotising himself that he would never ever lose in front of his home fans in the UFC.
Dan Hardy bringing back England Belongs to Me. And certainly a fitting walkout song here tonight as Dan Hardy fights in his native Nottingham for the first time since 2008.
When Dan Hardy came out that night, the noise was just incredible. And what we finally saw was the Dan Hardy who showed all the excitement of that stand-up that he delivers, the tenacious, come-forward fighter.
A different Dan Hardy here, and certainly an aggressiveness.
What he also did, he'd finally made the transition. He brought takedowns into his game in that fight as well.
Look at that level change from Dan Hardy. A new wrinkle to his game we haven't really seen before. And big elbows there for Hardy land flush.
When Dan Hardy's hand was raised at the end of that fight, you really felt we have seen at home Dan Hardy deliver and show this rounded journey he's just taken to become a complete mixed martial artist.
So I was getting ready for the Matt Brown fight, April 20th in San Jose, and everything was going as normal. I was 7 weeks into training camp, feeling good. So I went in to do my medicals, as I always do for the fights. And with it being California, there's an extra test that we have to do, which is the EKG. And I'd not had one before and never had a problem or anything, so never needed one. And when I did the EKG, it came back as abnormal. Basically, they found that I have, I don't have the syndrome, but it's Wolff-Parkinson-White. And Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome is, it's basically, it's either a second heartbeat or it's a series of cells in the heart that produce another electrical current. It could be 2 or 3 or 4, but generally it's quite weak. So one person has their regular heartbeat and then they might have the occasional sporadic beat. But with mine, I have 2 strong heartbeats. So I have my regular one and then a secondary heartbeat, which is pretty much almost as powerful. But the difference is I've never had any symptoms. I've never had any dizziness or palpitations or any of the problems that come with it. The way that the doctor explained it to me, which is the explanation I've been using, if I'm 12 minutes into a fight and I'm exhausted and my adrenaline's up, there's a danger that the electrical current can loop back on itself and cause cardiac arrest. That's the danger, but the increase in risk is minute. It's not even 1%. It would have been easier if my last fight in Nottingham was the last fight and I'd have made that decision. But because I didn't and I was already preparing for another fight, I never got any closure. There's always a part of me that still feels like I should be preparing for that fight because it was booked and never happened. It's kind of left me in a bit of a no man's land because I have the opportunity to have the surgery to to potentially get it corrected. But that doesn't seem like a logical decision for me because it's not something I need to do for my health. It's just something I need to do for my career. There are some days I wake up and I just want to be in training camp again. It's almost like martial arts is now my comfort zone. It's like competing is my comfort zone. And this break has given me an opportunity to kind of realise that, to be open to not competing, to have that taken away from me and have to explore other avenues that do make me feel uncomfortable.
A few years ago, you wouldn't have pictured Dan Hardy as having a role Octagon side commentating. But when you put him in that role, he's a very reasoned and very intelligent and articulate observer of the sport because he genuinely sees what's going on, and he's almost ahead of the action. He's been there, he's done it, he's been in the dressing room, he's felt the nerves. I think it could be a great role for him.
Whether I get cleared to fight and continue or whether I don't and this is the end, I'm happy with where I'm at right now as a person, and I think that whatever I go on to do, I'm going to do it better because I've had this experience and I'm here right now.
If Dan Hardy got the all clear over his heart complaint, I think he'd fight at the drop of a hat. Once a warrior, always a warrior. If he gets the opportunity, he will fight again. But I tell you what, every single second of every fight that he was involved in will go down in history and make him one of the great pioneers of British mixed martial arts.